Beep, beep, beep. That sound you hear is not the sound of a car alarm or a morning alarm clock. That sound is of my heart monitor. Because every time my heart falls below 30 beats per minute, I'm at risk of heart failure. My mom sits at the edge of my bed with tears of worry and a look of relief. They're changing all the cords on my body to put me into a new bed to bring me to a new hospital. And as the ambulance doors close behind me, I can feel panic set in. The sirens have never seemed so loud than in the back of the ambulance itself. And when I get to the new hospital, I have no idea why I'm there. All I want is to go home. But it would take weeks, months, to get there. Now, this is not where my story begins. I invite you to come back in time with me where I had the most amazing childhood. I didn't like sports, but what I loved was to watch my dad's face light up when we watched the game. We would take white t-shirts and we would spin them around our head every time his team got a point. And my mom, the most loving person I know, would wake up extra early in the morning. She'd make us pancakes, and I was often late for school, so she would wrap them in tinfoil and hand them to me as I walked out the door. I shared a room with my older sister, so when I was scared of the dark, I would crawl into her bed. She had a waterbed, so she could literally feel the waves of the bed moving. But if I stayed still enough, I was allowed to stay. And then everything shifted when I got to high school. I went from a class of 300 to 3,000. My dad moved out of the house, moving 4 states away. My sister moved out to go to university. And my mom fell into depression. We were still a family while a part of it felt broken, as we each lived in our own corners of our own world. And I tried my best to stay my happy, chipper self while I felt I withered away inside. And that day that I went into the hospital, my dad flew in from Boston, my sister drove down, my mom was there, my brother. And it's twisted and it's messed up, but I was so happy we were together again, even if it was gathered around my hospital bed. And the doctor said I need to stay inpatient because I had a weak heart and an eating disorder. I was 15 and I had no idea what that meant. And if I could travel back in time, I'd tell the doctors I didn't have body issues and I didn't have a weak heart. What I had was a broken one. And I didn't have the means or voice to express it. And although my tools of gathering the family back were effective, they were also destructive. I needed new ones. And I know the doctors, they were trying their best to help, but I hated the hospital. I was weighed and calculated and a number on their flip charts. If I gained enough weight, I could earn the privilege to go downstairs and sit in the courtyard on a park bench. How dare they restrict that freedom to a number on the scale? I begged my parents to take me out, and when they finally did, they didn't take me home. They took me to a place called Renfrew Rehab for other girls like me. We talked about nutrition and balanced meal plans. We talked about our fears, our insecurities, perhaps the abandoned parts of ourselves. And the more I shared openly and honestly, I felt connected to these women, vulnerable and seen. And then the moment came where I got to go home. A 6-hour drive, and I was home again. We had dinner as a family that night. My dad at the head of the table, my mom next to me, my brother, my sister, my dog under the table. We were all there together. But my dad didn't live at home anymore and would return to work. And my sister was home for a few days and would return to college. And my mom still had depression. I wasn't going to go back there. I wasn't going to make the same mistakes, so I vowed to do the only thing I knew at the time. I vowed to become the perfect everything. I wore the label that said perfect daughter because I knew if I could do that, I would make my mom happy. And I wore the label that said perfect student because I thought it would make my dad proud. And I wore the label that said peacekeeper because I didn't want to cause any trouble and I didn't want to rock the boat. And I joined the equestrian team and I started a women's club. I made National Honor Society. My resume was shiny and painted with gold. But I didn't feel happy. I felt more lost than ever. When the opportunity came to move to Europe, I jumped on it and quickly. I love that no one knew my old story or had any expectations of me. But as time went on, I didn't know who I was. I didn't have a strong sense of self or home within my own. So I set out to look for it. I traveled from Prague to the Arctic Circle, refusing to get on a plane. I backpacked through West Africa, volunteering in local villages. I slept on rooftops under the stars in the Middle East. And every time I came back, I had a new label to wear. This one said, I am brave because I have traveled the world. But over time, even these labels lost their shiny appeal. I still hadn't found that thing I originally set out to look for. I still hadn't found that sense of self. I had heard about a 10-day meditation retreat, 10 days of silence. That meant no talking, no reading, no music, no writing, no eye contact, 10 days of silence. I could hardly spend 10 minutes in my own brain without feeling anxiety. How was I going to last 10 days? And as I sat on my meditation pillow, the most interesting things came up. I thought of Dr. Rubinstein. He was an imaginary character I played with in the forest. And I thought of Mr. Erickson, my 6th grade science teacher, who did a headstand and ate a brownie to show that digestion can work against gravity. And I thought of all the shame of my eating disorder. The dark parts of myself I kept hidden from the people I loved most. And this wall that I had built up in myself that once served as protection now kept me stuck on the other side. And I realized when those ambulance doors closed behind me, I had closed my heart on something greater. And when the sirens were loud and blaring, I couldn't hear the sound of my own voice. I let the sound of fear drown out the ability to listen to myself. And as I was walking home from meditation one night, I was often captivated by the moon. I loved that it illuminated the whole sky and it would bring this soft glow to each one of the leaves. And since I didn't have a pen or paper, when I had a thought I really wanted to remember, I imagined this long, feathery pen, and I would write and inscribe on the neocortex of my own brain. That night I wrote, "Darkness cannot coexist when you shine light on it." Now, it sounds cliche, but it was a profound statement for me at the time. I needed to test my own hypothesis. I thought of a flashlight. Even when you shine it in the darkest corner, what emerges is light. And when the sun is not hiding behind the clouds, how it brings life and energy to everything. So if darkness could not coexist when you shine light on it, what was my antidote to the fear to be uncovered, to be fully seen, and the shame I carried around tied to my eating disorder? I knew what I needed to do. When I got home, I emailed everyone I loved, sharing my fears, my insecurities, sharing the shame of my eating disorder, hoping that if I shared the darkest parts of myself, I could bring it to the surface and what could emerge is light. And in allowing myself to be truly seen, I couldn't hide behind these self-constructed walls of limitations anymore. And as the emails came in of love and acceptance, there was one person I hadn't heard back from. And she was the most important person of all. Myself. If there was anything I had learned in silent meditation, it's if you get quiet enough and listen, really listen, you find your own answers. So I did. I got quiet. I listened. And I asked, what do I need for your love and approval, Kathleen? The answer I got back was not the one I wanted. She said, remove the labels that aren't yours. These labels were my connection point to the people I loved. She didn't repeat herself. She didn't have to. She was right. My worth cannot be found in a number or a resume or what others expect of me. Following someone else's dreams for me took me further from my own. Playing small and hiding my voice did not bring me peace. And I was brave, but not because of my world travels. I felt vulnerable and naked, like a giant infant learning to walk again for the first time. But what happened when I got rid of the old labels keeping me stuck, I allowed a space for something new. For the first time, my dad started to ask me what it was like to live as a creative person. My mom shared her stories about depression, which allowed me to feel deeply connected to her and see the vastness of her great heart. And my sister stopped calling me little Renehan because it was a label that didn't fit anymore. So there are 3 things that I'd like to share with you before I end today. The first is when we close the door on our hearts, it's quite obvious we can disconnect from others. But more importantly, we disconnect from ourselves. We disconnect from the ability to discover our inner strengths and our vast capability even in the hardest of tasks. Because it's leaning into that discomfort with curiosity, openness, and confidence that we have the opportunity to discover our real power. And when the world is loud and the sirens are going off, which I promise you it will, the world will get loud. Sometimes our true voice comes in a gentle whisper. So make sure you get quiet enough to listen. And labels will only stick if you allow them to be there, so take off the ones that aren't yours. They just build layers and resistance to being our true selves and developing meaningful connections. So take off the artificial labels that keep us stuck in boxes, and let's meet a place of authenticity instead. What labels do you need to remove that aren't yours? Where can you get quiet to hear the whisper of your own truth? And what doors have you closed, perhaps out of fear or protection, that need reopening? And not for them, for you, to know and to stand in your true power. Beep, beep, beep. Time's running out, so get started. Thank you.